Hey guys, Tim here, and today is T-Bucket Tuesday. So I'm shooting this on a Tuesday, working on my T-Bucket, so there's my corny joke. What I'm going to be working on today is installing a set of these Dakota Digital HDX gauges. Now, I've installed probably 6 to 8 sets of Dakota Digital gauges, all the way from the very beginning ones to the Retro series and anything and everything. The one set I haven't installed is these guys here, and what's different about these is it's not a direct bolt-in type replacement cluster. It's actually 7 individual gauges, and I wanted to install them to see what the process is like compared to the traditional style, and I think it looks better in this T-Bucket to fit with the build. So let me move the camera and I'll show you what's inside the box. So here's these HDX series gauges, and there's a few different options with them. So they have different styles, and you can order it with or without this middle readout, which changes. So the readout would go on one of these gauges. I don't remember which one. But what I liked it because it's a bigger screen here in the middle, and if you've ever installed or used the HDX gauges, that screen can tell you all sorts of information, changes all the settings, everything. So I kind of wanted it front and center. So right off the bat, you can see that it comes with all the gauges, and right here's the computer for it. So let me open this up. So there's the back side of the gauges. Let me pull one of these off here. So it kind of mounts just like any traditional, individual gauge, where there's these mounting cups, like these guys, and they have the little studs on here with the little plastic wing nuts. So I believe it says in the instructions that you need a minimum of 2 inches of clearance from your mounting point to behind it, which I will have more than enough there, so I'm not worried about that. So basically, you drill a hole, you slide this in the dash, you put this in on the back side, and there's some depth there, and then it just pinches it against the dash. So the big thing is, this is the hardest part of usually the whole installation, is wiring in this guy. But basically all the instrumentation gets wired into this, and then there's a couple cables that come off of here that go into the gauges. I'm not quite sure yet how it works since there's multiple gauges, but I'll show you guys when I figure that out. So this is the main computer system. So you can see it's really basic stuff. It's hot and run, tack, input. If you're running your sensors, those get wired up here. All these are warning lights type things. So also in here is instructions, all the different wiring for it. One thing that does come with these gauges is actually templates. So these are the templates that you can use to create the holes in the dash. Now what I ended up doing is this is a 2 1/16 inch hole, and I bought a hole saw that size, and this is a 3 3/8, so I bought a hole size that size. So if you wanted to, you could put this on the dash, trace it, and then cut it out with a Dremel or something like that. I chose to just get a hole saw because I'm not that great at making holes with the Dremel, so that way I can have nice clean holes. So the other box package in here, see, it's kind of stuck down, this is all the wiring and the sensors to make it all work. So there's usually, depending on your engine that's set up, but there's oil pressure sending unit, water temperature sending unit, a speedometer, different adapters to go to different engines, and the wiring to connect it from those sensors up to this computer box. So let me show you on the car what I'm thinking, and we'll start this installation. So here's the dash on the 23 T-Bucket, and when I was debating which gauges I wanted to use, I ended up printing out, cutting out these circles to represent the gauges, and I was playing with different layouts. So, since it's such a small car and such a small dash, I was originally thinking of making it symmetrical to, like, the speedometer would be in the middle and they would go out, but sitting in here, I didn't like that, so I ended up laying it out this way. So it'll probably be something like tachometer, the HDX readout, the speedometer, and then all the rest of the gauges. So This was just me kind of playing with it, but you can see that it'll fit in this dash no problem. And so what I'm going to do next is pull these guys off and measure and actually lay out where I'm going to use the hole saw to cut these holes in the dash, and I'll show you how that looks. Alright, so I got my gauge locations all laid out here, and this is the theory that I went with on it. I wanted them basically centered from top to bottom a little bit, but then that crowded this gauge, so I bumped it up so you can see there's kind of two lines running horizontal here. This gauge here is going to be centered over my steering column, so that way when I'm sitting in the car, I'm driving it and I'm behind the steering wheel, this gauge will be centered. So it'll probably be tachometer, the readout, speedometer. Now there would be 4 gauges over here, but I actually think I'm only going to run 3. So what I'm going to run is water temperature, oil pressure, volts, and the fourth one that comes with the kit would be a fuel level gauge, but this is a T-bucket and I only have a 10-gallon tank, so I'm never going to be driving this thing for hours on end. It'll be short little, maybe 1 hour drives at the most, where then I'll fill back up anyways, so I don't really see the need for it, and it'll keep it a little bit cleaner. And on top of that, on my fuel tank, which is right behind where I'm sitting, it'll make it a little bit cleaner look there without a sending unit sitting there. So I think for right now I'm going to leave that out, but I'm going to leave the room in the dash, so if I ever wanted to add it, I could easily add it. So let me get my hole saws going here, and we'll show you what that looks like with these things all drilled out. Alright, so now I'm ready to actually drill the holes. So I've laid everything out. I actually went ahead and pre-drilled a little pilot hole just to make it easier, because I just don't want this bit walking on me too much. So let's drill the first hole here, see how this goes. I drilled backwards first here because it was pulling it in and biting. So now let's go forward here. There it is. There's the first hole. We just got to drill the rest here. So let me, sounds like my battery's about to die too. So let me drill the rest of them, and I'll show you what the rest look like here. Alright, so I got the gauge holes all drilled, and it made quite a bit of a mess being fiberglass, so I went ahead and did a quick vacuum job real quick. So now the next step is I want to test fit these in here just to kind of see what they look like. So this guy's oil pressure, so I'm going to put this in here, and it looks like what I might need to do is massage these holes a little bit. So I bought a 2 1/16 inch hole saw, which is what this calls for, but this is pretty darn tight. So I think what I'll do is I'll get a Dremel and just lightly go around the holes, 1 to kind of clean it up a little bit, and 2 just to make it just that little bit bigger, but at least I know that it's going to fit nice and snug and not flop around. So here's the speedometer, and so this was 3 3/8. So this guy, I think what I was going to do is put it here, and this one looks like it fits a little bit better, so I won't need to massage it at all. So really simple. It's got that little cup, so you slide it in. You can see that the cup actually has a spot in it for the wires to come through, so it's marked top, so it'll fit when you put it on there. The wires will still be able to connect. So what we'll do is I'm going to put this guy in here, and we'll slide this on the back. And then all I have to do is attach my little wing nuts, and then that guy's installed. So let me bore these guys out, and I'm going to set the other gauges in there, and we'll kind of show you what it looks like. Then after that, the next step is going to be to mount this guy. Even though it's a little car, I don't have heater, air conditioning, anything like that. So I got a lot of room under the dash, so I'm going to mount this guy probably on the firewall. I'll show you what that looks like. And the other issue that I need to do, or thing I need to figure out, is I have a complete painless wiring harness for this car, and it's going to have its own fuse box. So I need to get that out and see where it mounts, and then I can mount this off to the side or something like that. Once this is installed though, everything's wired up, you really don't need to access it too much unless you do a bad job and you have a loose wire or something like that. But really this thing's a pretty much plug and play deal. So let me get these bored out and get the rest of the gauges in there so we can at least kind of see what it looks like. Alright, so I got the gauges all installed in the dash. I shouldn't say installed, but they're sitting in there. I just kind of wanted to see what they look like, and I'm pretty happy with them. I think they're going to look really good. One thing that's really cool about the HDX gauges is you can change the colors on them. It's something I forgot to mention earlier. So there's like 12 preset, and then you can individually change the needle color, the backlight color, the readout color, like all these different colors you can change, and makes it really cool. So you can really adapt them to whatever color scheme either A, your mood is, or B, what your color of the car is. So my plan is to paint this car like a dark green color, so I'll probably have these things light up green for me. But I want to, right now I can't do a whole lot more until I get all the painless wiring installed, which will give me my hot and run. You can see too that the engine is just a dirty junkyard engine. So my next thing I'm going to do is clean the engine. And once I do that, then I can start installing some of the sensors and things like that. But let me show you something really quick that is going to make the installation of this even easier. And I'm going to pop these gauges out and set them on my workbench, and I'm going to show you how easy it is to wire up these gauges. So give me 1 second here and I'll show you that. Alright, I wanted to show you before I install these, and I still have to install the painless harness, how you kind of wire these up. And before that though, there's one detail I missed earlier, is that these gauges come with these kind of like rubber O-rings, and they go around the gauge and slide down, and then you would slide the gauge into the dash, and then that way it helps seal it up, and gives it a little bit of leeway to where it helps with vibration and such. So I'll do that when I install them the final time, but I forgot to mention that earlier, so I wanted to show you real quick. So with the gauges, it comes with its own wiring. So there's a bunch of these kind of like little jumper harnesses, and the beauty of this is that you don't have to wire these in a specific way. So it's just a matter of sitting here kind of figuring it out, how they go. So there's three of these guys that has one female and two males. So there's one there, one here, and then there's this guy that has one female and 4 males. So what we'll do is we're going to start plugging in the gauges here. So here's our 3 big gauges that are now wired up. And let's say you have the 3 big gauges on one side of the dash and the other ones are on the other for whatever reason. They do include 2 extension harnesses too, so if you need more length to these, you can, like, let's just say mine are together, but let's just say they weren't. You could plug that in and get to the other side. So then we'll plug this guy in. And plug it into a gauge. And then this one, since this is the male, we'll plug this into a female. And one of them into the gauge. And then we'll end up doing the same thing here. So this one's already plugged in. Here's the other female. And we'll plug this guy in here. And that's it. So once you have all these kind of plugged in, you can tuck them away however you want under the dash. Then you have this guy, so you can plug this in, and this is a couple foot long cable. So really, if you have this this computer mounted several feet away from your gauges for whatever reason, you can use this to connect to it. And this is really all the hard part here. So this is where you're going to connect your sensors and your hot and run, ground, tachometer input. If you have cruise control to, like a light that goes on the dash, you plug that in there. Your turn signal indicators, high beam indicator, brakes, just all that stuff gets wired into this guy. Really simple. There's these little ports. You stick the wire in there, you tighten down this little screw, and it's installed. So once this is done, this is the hard part, which isn't even that hard. And like I said, for oil, temperature, and speedometer, they provide the gauges and the wiring for that. So the rest you just use out of the factory car harness, whatever harness that is. But then once these are all daisy chained together like this, then you just take this guy, you plug it in, and then bam, all the gauges are going to work. So it doesn't matter either what order these gauges are. You could have, the tach, and then the fuel gauge, and then the speedometer, then the oil pressure, however you want to lay them out. It does not matter. Long as they're all connected, then the computer will send the right signal to the right gauge. So it makes it really easy to wire up. And like I said, I'll end up wiring this up completely once I get further along on the car. But that's really the complete wiring for it. Is just a matter of sitting here connecting all these together, and then you're on your way. Now, let's say, for example, we're not going to use one of the gauges. Like for me, I'm not going to use the fuel gauge, which let's just say it was this guy here. What the instructions say is you'll plug it in to calibrate everything, and then once you've calibrated everything, you can unplug that gauge, and they include two of these terminators. So you just plug it in, the wiring harness, and that caps off the wiring, which the computer needs to know. So for me, my gauge, my setup, put that off to the side, is going to look something like this, with these all together and one of these blocked off. So that way, all the gauges work and the computer's happy and displays everything correctly. All right, so that pretty much concludes the installing these gauges. I'm going to have to go ahead and paint the car, finish everything up, get the full painless wiring harness in there to do that. But as you can see, it's a really simple process. If you were to start this from installing all the sensors, running your wires, drilling the holes, everything, it might take you a half a day to a day depending on your setup. It's a really simple thing. Like I said, I've installed 6 to 8 sets of Dakota digital gauges, and they're really simple to do. And the best part is they work phenomenally. I've never had any sort of issue with them. I've had them in a bunch of different cars, but thousands of miles on them through all sorts of back bumpy roads, everything. Things work phenomenal. The only other thing that you really have to do once you get everything wired and everything, you do have to calibrate it, and they make it extremely easy to do that. One of them is you go into the menu, you tell them what fuel sender unit you're using. So it needs to know how many ohms are on that sender. So obviously if it's a Ford or a GM sendering unit, it's going to use different range there. So really simple to do. The other one is to calibrate the speedometer. And how I have always done it is you take your regular daily driver, you go out on the street, and you clock off, I believe it's a quarter of a mile, and then you hop in the car, you go at the beginning of that quarter of a mile, you push a button, you take off and go, and you don't have to romp on it or anything, just nice and cruising. And then as soon as you get to that quarter mile, you push the button again, and you don't have to stop. You can just keep on driving, and then boop, it'll automatically calibrate. And if you don't get it quite right, you can still go in there and manually fine tune it. So if it's off a mile or two an hour, but every single time I've done it, it's been spot on. I usually am checking it with my phone GPS or something like that. And it's always been spot on. So these are some gauges you've been considering, I would highly recommend them. These ones are really slick, like I said, being individual gauges, so they make them way more universal to really put it into any sort of vehicle or dash. If you're looking for something a little more racy oriented, these are great. I don't know what else you want me to say about them. They're great gauges. Go out, get yourself a set.